So welcome, colleagues. As you join us from all over the nation, it's wonderful to be with you. I'm Caleb Jackson, Head of Change for Youth Sector at the Youth Endowment Fund. Youth Endowment Fund is a Make It Work centre. We're here to find out what works to prevent children and young people becoming involved in violence. And today we are talking all about the youth sector amongst some of my favourite peeps in the sector. We've got policy leaders, we've got the funders, and we've got national umbrella organizations supporting the youth work sector here. So I'll be introducing Lena, Jacob, Paul, and Alex shortly. But just a few small words from me as people land. So to kick us off, we are soon to launch our youth sector practice guidance, and I thought I'd plug it from the start in January. And this will be 5 to 8 recommendations that the primary audiences, who are going to most likely be commissioners and funders in different varying forms, place-based leaders who invest in youth provision to reduce youth violence. That will be the primary. And the secondary audience will be delivery organizations and many others. So that comes out in January 2026, this winter, and we're looking forward to that. And part of this is to rev us all up towards that, and that's probably the main message that I leave with you this morning. So hold on to your seatbelt, or you're in for a stellar performance by colleagues, and lots of information to come here. And I'm very excited to be able to host this this morning. There's many of you signed up. As per usual, some of the housekeeping, please, you'll be on mute. Your cameras are currently off. I think when we come to Q&A, you'll be able to ask your questions. And you'll be able to use the chat function too. By way of introduction, we're going to kick off with Lena from DCMS, who's going to talk 10 minutes about the slides and insights from the policy land, and then we'll be hanging around for 10 minutes to answer Q&As as well. And then Lena's more than welcome to stay for the whole session or dash off. And then we'll be joined by Jacob, Paul, and Alex soon after. So with those announcements out, if anything happens in terms of the webinar or the technical issues, we'll hang about and try and get it sorted as per usual in that way. There is no fire exit here. You make your own way around that, and you know where your own facilities are. But hopefully you've brought yourself. I will be impressed if someone puts in the chat that I've got a cake and a drink, because this is the virtual learning cafe. So points and top prizes for those who can show us that they're coming to the virtual learning with a cafe style cuisine or refreshments. Right, so into to welcome our first guest. So Lena Hartmann is a senior policy advisor working on youth policy in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And over the past 4 years in the department has worked on a number of high profile projects, including the transformation of the National Citizenship Service Programme, and has updated the statutory guidance for local authorities, youth services, as well as the new National Youth Strategy, working closely across government to set a new direction for young people in England. Lena has experience of working in the civil society sector, as well as in the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, that's OECD, and is a volunteer mentor for young asylum seekers in London, which warmed my heart when I read that, Lena. So over to you and welcome. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Caleb, for the introduction and the invitation. Let me try and get the slides up. Hopefully this is not the beginning of tech issues. Can you all see that? Brilliant, great start. Yeah, so as Caleb said, I'm Lena Hartmann. I work in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, specifically at the moment on the National Youth Strategy. Been in the team for about 4 years, and I've worked on quite a few different things, which I'm happy to speak about. But I think today I'm going to focus on National Youth Strategy, some of our current programmes and approach to evidence. I want to say I'm not an analyst. We have incredible people in the team who live and breathe evidence much more than I do, but my work means that I'm involved in kind of every part of evidence-based youth policy, whether it's kind of developing and assessing policy options, designing a programme, evaluating a programme, many other joys. In all of this, knowing what the problem is, what might work to tackle it, how best to take learnings and improvements forward is kind of the essence of what I do, both kind of within and outside of government. Otherwise, obviously, that leads to bad policies, bad implementations, bad evaluations, generally suboptimal outcomes across the board, which no one wants. So that means looking at a range of work, what's been done, what could be done. It could be evaluations of programs, it could be some of the research that DCMS has funded and developed with others, or it could be some wider research or best practice done by all of you wonderful people. In DCMS, we've published a few important research reports and evaluations, which have been particularly helpful over the past few years to make the case for youth work and youth services more broadly, and for some of the policies that we have made in that space. You can see some of those on the slides, but there are way, way more. And we've worked with great people to look at things like the impact of participation in youth services on a range of outcomes, socio-emotional skills, well-being, that sort of thing. We've also looked at the impact of the closure of youth clubs, particularly when it comes to crime and antisocial behaviour, and that's been a really interesting piece of research. We've looked at the barriers and enablers to participation, which has been particularly interesting when it comes to the targeting of our work, and the most recent focus from the new government around kind of disadvantaged young people and a place-based approach. And then obviously, we've looked at what certain programs achieve for young people in the areas where they operate, whether it's kind of Uniform Youth Fund, Million Hours, and many, many others. I should say that, we know this is a complex sector. We know that robust evidence can be tricky. We also know that working with government can be tricky, and fully acknowledge that. But all of this kind of meant that we could, I think, make a really strong case across government and to Treasury for a bit of a better approach to youth work and youth services, and for something that makes sense across government to drive our work in that space with a bit of a shared direction. I've been in the team for 4 years, and I've kind of seen the change between the first year and the work that we're doing this year, and how much more robust our evidence and our narrative is when we talk to other government departments and Treasury, and a lot of that is because of the evidence that's been developed over the past few years. That's also what enabled us to launch the National Youth Strategy, and that's kind of the starting point that we wanted, which essentially is a cross-government strategy to set a new direction for young people, focusing on kind of youth services at all levels. The key thing there that we wanted was for it to be co-produced. So the whole idea was for it to be based on young people's priorities, work closely with young people in the sector throughout the development of the strategy. So that's why we set up a youth advisory group and an expert advisory group, which have been absolutely brilliant to work with. That's also why we worked with a range of organisations to run what ended up being called the Deliver You campaign, which you might have seen, to engage with quite a lot of young people. You can see that on the slide, but we reach thousands of young people through, survey, focus group, deep dives, hacks, basically anything that we could think of to try and talk to young people in a different way. And we also talked to close to 1,500 sector leaders. That's not just youth organisations. That was also, people in the sports sector, arts sector, police, local authorities. And the aim was kind of to paint a bit of a as comprehensive as possible picture of what it looks like to be a young person in 2025, and what solutions both young people and the sector were after, with both quantitative evidence but also qualitative evidence with a lot of the work that we did with young people. All of that feeds into a report that's called Today's Youth Tomorrow's Nation, which summarises those insights, as well as loads of other evidence, which we'll publish alongside a strategy later in the year. And then based on those insights, we have developed that strategy, which looks to give young people the skills, opportunities and connections they need. That kind of in-person connection point is really key and a real focus across government at the moment, to kind of take young people out of their bedrooms and screens, make sure they can have positive friendships, interact safely with youth workers, wider trusted adults, and feel a sense of belonging in their communities. That's obviously not to say that the digital world has not brought incredible opportunities to young people, but it is that sort of balance and making sure that it is productive and helps them to engage in their communities. The strategy will present a bit of a clear plan in a you-said-we-did approach to respond directly to what young people have told us. It is cross-government, so it covers a range of topics. You'll see things around youth facilities and activities, youth workforce, safety, mental health, all of the things that, young people have told us matter to them. And you'll also see some kind of concrete funded first steps for the next spending review and some longer term ambitions that we want to work with you and others to further develop and achieve. And then the final thing to mention is that the strategy doesn't just focus on the kind of what we'll be delivering, but also the how. We really wanted to have a clear narrative about how we do things and shifting that. Obviously, youth empowerment is a big part of the strategy and will continue to be, and we'll make sure that's very clear. The cross-government approach that we've taken has been incredibly positive. As I said, I've been in the team 4 years, and we now work with, I think, over 10 departments for this strategy, which is really, really different. And that's something that will be key to kind of the delivery and the reporting on the strategy. And then the final element is the partnerships aspect. So obviously recognise that government can't do it alone. It's a shared problem that we all need to contribute to, not only kind of youth organisations, but, parents and teachers and everyone involved in a young person's life, with an emphasis on kind of just making working together easier and encouraging different actors to play part. We're in the final stages of developing the strategy, which is really exciting. Obviously, publication is just the first step. We're very much looking forward to having it in the world and working together to deliver it. And obviously, evidence and best practice and lessons learned and all that we've learned in developing it will be central to kind of its delivery, if we want it to be a living, breathing document that evolves with young people. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that we obviously haven't waited for the National Youth Strategy to be published to actually do work and apply those insights. So we have a number of programs at the moment which we are either delivering or developing, which kind of exemplify that. The Local Youth Transformation Pilot is one of them. It's all about rebuilding local authorities' capability and leadership in the youth space, understanding what's needed to kind of build and secure a really good local offer, building our expertise in that space. It's definitely a big shift from the previous government in terms of how we want to work with local authorities and local areas. So we want to make sure that we know how best to do that and how we can support local authorities to do that. So we're starting with 12 local authorities this year next, with kind of support, guidance, tools, funding to implement their plans. And the idea is that we'll learn from this and that will kind of support the implementation and hopefully sustainability of other kind of place-based programs across government. Which leads me to the Young Futures Hubs, which have recently become a DCMS responsibility, working with other government departments. There's a lot of detail on the slide, but the whole idea is essentially to bring together services to meet 3 outcomes: opportunities, so increasing opportunities for young people, improving mental health and well-being, and reducing crime. And here again, the hubs will be designed with local area. The idea is to leverage local understanding of services in the area. It's really about the areas choosing the location and what the hubs will provide to meet the needs of young people in a place. And it's all about learning as well. So we're investing this year in 8 early adopters in areas of high knife crime and antisocial behaviour, and that will be kind of the start of the design and implementation of the programme. We have plans to establish up to 50 hubs over the next 4 years. So learning and evaluation is going to be key, building on those early adopters and making sure that we evolve our approach. And then finally, I have one last one, which is the Enrichment Expansion Programme. Not the final name, because it's definitely not, snazzy enough. But we announced this in the summer. This is a programme which will launch next financial year, so 2026-27, and it will support up to 400 schools to provide a better, more tailored enrichment offer. And it's all about better coordination in the area to connect schools with enrichment providers to kind of increase access to a really good enrichment offer. So we're working at the moment with the Department for Education and ministers to design the programme. If you're interested in that, we're kind of really keen to bring people in that design. So you can sign up through a link that I can post in the chat afterwards to register your interest in that co-design, which I think, is going to be really interesting. I think this is me. I'll bring this to a close because despite all of this exciting content, you've listened to me for way too long. But yeah, we're really excited about this work, very much looking forward to doing more together in that space. If you want to be kept up to date on all of our work, you can sign up to our newsletter by the QR code on the slide. There's also a link which I'll put in the chat as well. And yeah, if you have any questions now, I'll do my very best to answer them. I should flag that if there are very specific questions on programs, I'm gonna have to take those away to colleagues who are closer to it and will oversee them, but I'll do my best to answer most of them. And I think that's it.
Thanks, Lena. Lots going on there, and obviously, favourable to see such a focus from government on young people, and many in this room will appreciate the same. We got a question from Sarah. I want to say Sarah. Sarah, do tell me if I've pronounced that wrong. What we do is Yanina, who is co-piloting with me, will bring you off mute, and then you can ask your camera. You can turn your camera and ask your question. So, Sarah, over to you.
No worries. Thank you for that. Thanks, Lena, as well. That's a really helpful presentation. Just quickly, my name's Sarah. I know it's confusing. I work at the GLA in London at the moment. I was just wondering, in terms of your presentation there, it's really helpful. I've been to a few different ones where DCMS have really clearly set out the different priorities and things that you're working on. Where best would you see, people like us at the Greater London Authority or other youth organizations, etc., the sector coming in to sort of influence that, I guess, going forward? Because I know there's been lots of plans and stuff there, and I saw about the potentially going into the enrichment expansion program. But yeah, if there's any insights or things that we could share across our work, it'd be really good to connect up.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think there's a couple of things. One is honestly a general, invitation for people to send us stuff. I think we have really learned and been incredibly, positively surprised by all of what has been sent to us during the engagement phase of the strategy. Obviously, we try and, keep up to date with all of the evidence and research and best practice, but there's so much good stuff that's happening that we're not close to. So general invitation to always send us stuff. We might not be able to, respond and engage with everything deeply immediately, but that, it doesn't disappear. This is something that we look at. The second thing is obviously the design of our programs. So as much as possible, we try and co-design them in some way, shape or form. Whether it's early on the design of the program or during, pilots and that sort of thing, trying to gather a lot of learnings and sharing those. So that's the case for the local youth transformation, for example, and the enrichment program. And we'll try and do that for most of the things that we do. Caveat, obviously, that, depends on timings and how open ministers can be, but that is generally the approach that we want to take. And then the last thing is, I guess, generally also inviting us to things like this. We're always very happy to share our work, but it's also an opportunity for us to receive, questions and challenges that we might not have thought about. I think, completely honestly, having that open approach does have some risk for government because we don't want to overpromise, we don't want to overshare, but I think it has been really helpful for the strategy itself for us to be challenged that way. So that's also an open invitation.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Sarah. Next is Sonia. Hi, Sonia. How are we doing? Do you want to just introduce who you are and then ask your question?
My name's Sonia Burton. I'm from Nottingham City. We are one of the chosen 8 that you've spoken about. I'm the adolescent service manager. What I wanted to ask, sorry, I'm struggling because there's an echo. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
You want to try again?
Yeah, that's great. The thing I'm really concerned about, and it's something I've mentioned before, is about trying to get youth work to be a protected status, because anybody can set up youth provision and all local authorities will come across organisations that are great, and there's some in the voluntary sector that do amazing work, but because it's not a protected status, it leaves that gap for exploitation. So I'm all for the lived experience, and there is some people that have got great lived experience and they can separate, but there is some people that necessarily don't separate their lived experience, and they end up working with our most vulnerable children, and they can use the label of youth worker. So I was just wondering if there is any weight in trying to get youth work a protected status.
Thank you. And yeah, I think that's incredibly important, partly because I think there's more and more conversations about the role of trusted adults widely in a young person's life, which I think is incredibly positive and something that needs to be recognised. But we can't really lose sight of that sort of safety and safeguarding aspect and making sure that the right people engage at the right moment. We work, as you may know, quite closely with the NYA, and I think we have someone on the call who will talk about that much better than I will. But that's part of the work that we do with them, not only in terms of like guidance and resources, but also kind of qualifications and training and making sure that we have a really clear story about that. And then separately on the question of kind of why the trusted adults and how do we talk about that and how do we make sure that those are trained and safe. That's also something that we've looked at as part of the National Youth Strategy, kind of was an opportunity to look afresh at that across government and how we look at that essentially. So I'll let my colleague in the NYA potentially cover some of this as well, but this is a very live question.
Yeah, thank you, Lena, for your response. There are some similar questions in the chat, which I'll try and cement. I mean, Adam Muirhead from down south said he would like to see youth work explicitly mentioned as a broker, deliverer, strategist in the guidance on enrichment, building on the work that's done through strategy development. And I'm sure, I mean, conversations with yourself and many of your colleagues have been that how do you continue to centre youth work, the value of youth work, the professionalism of youth work in that regard. Did you want to share any insights or any progress that's happening in that kind of regulatory, I want to say, kind of professionalism space?
Yeah, I'm going to assume that what you mean on the guidance and enrichment is the enrichment framework, but if not, just so we're working closely with DfE on that. I know we're continuously feeding thoughts from the sector on it, so I can just take that away and make sure that that's something that they consider. Great,
thank you, Lena. Alux, did you want to say something quickly on that point as the kind of rep from NYA?
Yeah, I think the point about protected status is really key, especially as we see more and more now reference to the role of trusted adults in particular, and we're seeing that we expect to see that in the strategy as well. And it's we need to be able to define what there needs to be a core characteristics of what is a trusted adult, of which we would obviously consider youth work qualifications as part of that. I'm going to talk in my slides a little bit about the kind of dilemma facing the youth workforce at the moment. And the NYA is creating a pathway to try and help create the youth workers for tomorrow. And part of that work will undoubtedly involve thinking about the protected status. But by doing that, you do need to be mindful that you then don't want to alienate an awful lot of the workforce at the same time. So it is a balancing act. But I suppose I would urge you to sign up to our sessions in Youth Work Week, where we're talking about our youth work transformation sessions to talk to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a very live subject, this one. Trusted adults, is it youth workers, is it not? What does that mean? What's the framing? And like it's also, just to share candidly with colleagues, it's a very difficult trade-off. There are opposing polar thoughts and views, both from the sector, and the sector is important to take along with us. And so it's a very difficult tension, which I think some of these opportunities may help us get closer in that regard. Super. Lena, thank you, fantastic. Feel free to stick around and hear others speak, or if you've got quite a busy diary, please do shoot off. So next is Jacob Diggle, who is over at UK Youth, and thanks so much for answering all those questions. It was really fantastic. Great to have you here. So Jacob is the Chief Impact Officer if I have my memory serves me right, yes, at UK Youth. The UK's infrastructure body for youth work. Jacob leads the charity research, evaluation, service design, and policy work. Has led major studies of youth work impact, including the 2022 study Untapped, which is modeling the economic impact of youth work. Prior to joining UK Youth, for 4 years ago, Jacob led research team at Mind, which is the mental health charity, and worked on a youth unemployment policy for Jacinda Ardern, who is the former Prime Minister of New Zealand. So, Jacob, you kept that one secret, didn't you? Over to you.
Right. Thanks, Caleb. Pleasure to be with you all. I think, as Lena said right at the top, we've seen a bit of a transformation in youth work evidence over the last couple of years, and it was a real pleasure trying to pull together this slide deck to try and squeeze in all of the things that we could fit into 15 minutes rather than try and scramble around to try and pad out the time. And I think that's a testament to the hard work of so many people on this call. As the kind of UK's infrastructure body for youth work, one of the key roles that we play in trying to widen the reach and deepen the impact of youth work is about research and policy work. And I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the key things that we've been involved in as UK Youth, but also touch on some of the kind of wider sector efforts. When we're talking about the kind of state of youth work evidence, sometimes it can be kind of quite a narrow conversation. It can be, how can we prove that we're worth people's time, attention, and money? And the focus of the evidence work is about showing something to other people rather than actually moving from the kind of proving to the improving of our work and thinking about young people and youth workers as the primary audience for our evidence, rather than this just being a kind of defensive thing that we want to try and prove to other people. But also we can think about the kind of evidence in an overly narrow way just about the impact of youth work, which is really important to understand. But I'd encourage us to think a bit more broadly about what does the evidence tell us about the actual support that young people want and how that's changing over time, as well as what youth work is on offer, because we know it's a messy picture. Who's really accessing that youth work, and importantly, who's missing out, and how can we make sure that participation is more equitable? What the impact of youth work is on young people, really crucially, and we're able to talk about that much more confidently than we were even 3 or 4 years ago. And then also, how can youth work be delivered even more effectively? We can confidently say that youth work is life-changing, but also young people's lives are changing all the time, and youth work needs to keep evolving to keep up with it. So these are the kind of areas I'm going to just give you a flavour of some of the things that we know, but there's a huge amount more detail to dig into. So in terms of what support young people actually want, there's a huge amount of kind of needs analysis that's gone out there. But in order to inform the National Youth Strategy, the Back Youth Alliance, this kind of national consortium of some of the largest youth organisations, did a rapid evidence review that UK Youth led, looking at trying to pull together all of the strongest evidence we've got about young people's current preferences for support. The kind of needs that people were grappling with won't be a surprise to anyone on this call. Mental health and well-being comes through really strongly. Social connection and cohesion comes through really strongly at a time where we know our communities are experiencing a lot of tension and division. Financial concerns aren't just a kind of fashionable issue during a cost of living crisis. They're kind of deeply embedded in young people's realities. Employability and career support comes up really strongly, and we know we've got almost 1 million young people not in education, employment or training, and those figures are getting worse month on month. Crime and community safety, both the kind of reality of that and the fear of that, and young people becoming both victims and perpetrators. And also a desire for more meaningful social action and opportunities for political engagement. Young people saying they don't feel heard, they don't feel respected, they don't feel listened to, and they want to shape the conversation. Those needs are important to recognise, but also how young people want to be supported is just as important. And what comes through really strongly here is young people are wanting safe spaces to be and to spend time, and wanting trusting relationships with adults they can trust. They really crucially want choice and control over the types of service and support they receive. And this is such a crucial component of youth work provision, sort of the core values of youth work. This is a voluntary process for young people, and how to make sure that young people have as much choice and control over the types of activities, the types of support they receive is a thing that we know youth workers grapple with every day. They want respect, and they want real power sharing with them, and young people will sniff people being disingenuous from 1 million miles off. So that's really crucial. Financial barriers to access are coming up more and more as an issue for young people, why don't have access to youth work, and why the access is now getting more and more unequal, with some of the most affluent young people having the best access to youth work. And something that we kind of quite often miss out or don't emphasize enough, because we're trying to be serious and we're trying to talk about the kind of impact on core outcomes and contribution to the government's missions, everything else. But like, young people want fun, they want joy, they want opportunities to be a young person and have a great time. And that's a really valuable thing that we know youth work contributes to. As Lena talked about, the National Youth Strategy has been shaped by a large consultation with young people, and UK Youth's been a really proud consortium member leading that youth consultation. And so the kind of findings of that are going to be published really soon when the National Youth Strategy comes out. We're promised by the end of 2025. We're all waiting with bated breath on that, and that will do some further work to surface more about what we know young people want. But I think the themes here probably won't be that surprising. In terms of what youth work's actually on offer, we've got some really important resources for this, and I'm not going to steal Alex from MYA's thunder, because the National Youth Sector Census is a really important tool that the MYA produce, and our colleagues over at YouthLink Scotland are doing a kind of a version of that effort in Scotland, and we're working with nation partners in Wales and Northern Ireland to get a better picture of what provision is happening and the state of that provision in different nations. But this is a really difficult thing, surprisingly difficult thing to try and get your hands on. As part of the research that Caleb mentioned as part of the introduction, we did UK Youth, we did an economic assessment of youth work's impact back in 2022. And one of the key things we had to figure out was actually how much youth work is happening and how much is it costing, in order to understand what its benefits are. And we did a lot of work using 360 grant giving data, where philanthropic organisations report on their spend. We looked at government reported data about local authority spend. We also then did a sample of Charity Commission accounts to look at various different kinds of organisations and where their money coming from. But it was a very labour-intensive piece of work. These were some of the kind of best assumptions we could get, which was about £2 billion a year is being spent by the sector, and only about a quarter of that is actually coming from the government anymore. A lot of the rest of it is coming from charitable fundraising, from payments by families, by commercial social enterprise activities, and the enormous effort that's being made by almost 200,000 volunteers and 70,000 paid staff across almost 9,000 organisations. So there's a huge amount of activity going on, and I think that stat about the funding mix is really important, because we talk very heavily about government investment into youth work, and sadly it has dramatically reduced, and we all know how painful this is for the sector and for the young people who were previously relying on it for support. That funding has reduced dramatically, but the sector has been incredibly innovative in trying to think about how to keep the lights on and how to secure funding from other sources. So while we've seen a 73% reduction in public funding for youth work, and that map on the right-hand side looks at that on a local authority by local authority level, it's a pretty bleak picture. I think we should be really proud of the resilience and innovation the sector's shown to try and find alternative funding models. But frankly, we're not going to be able to unlock the full value of youth work without a really meaningful change in public investment. When we talk about that kind of broader picture of public investment, we're often thinking about austerity and, well, everything got cut, didn't it? And it's all bad. But actually, I think this stat from a report that UK Youth published with the Institute for Government last year, looking at youth work and its role in supporting prevention, the cuts to local authorities spend on youth work are much more severe and dramatic than even lots of the other cuts they've made to other services. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves of that. Yes, we can all see the effect of the potholes on the streets because local authorities aren't investing in fixing the roads anymore. But they've cut that much less than they've cut youth work budgets. The national uproar there is about cutting libraries and the tragic impacts that has on young people's learning and safe spaces to go, rightly so. But youth services cut even more. And so I think we really need to keep reminding people this isn't just, oh, no one has any money, oh, public services are tight in general. Youth services have been really disproportionately impacted here. In terms of who accesses youth work, we published a report just a couple of weeks ago funded by the DCMS with our partners at SQW, and I think some of those SQW colleagues are on the call, fantastic researchers to work with, looking at who participates in youth work and what the different kind of profile of participation looks like. And we see a really clear picture. Within that, participation in youth work decreases with age. So older teenagers less participating than younger teenagers, is higher amongst boys than girls, is higher amongst young people who are white, and is much higher in the more affluent communities. And that graph on the right-hand side, I promise I'm trying to do this with as few charts as possible, but you don't get a clearer line than that. That's the relationship between household income and participation in youth work. And if you have more money, you are so much more likely to have a child accessing youth work, because families value this. They think it's really important. They're showing that they are with their pocketbook, and they're paying for it themselves if they can. This is something that's really important, but it has led to a really distorting impact where the most affluent areas have got much more youth work than the least affluent. We also know that there are other forms of disproportionate impact here. So we know, for example, that Black young people are almost 3 times more likely to say they don't have an adult to speak to about issues in their life compared to their white peers. And we also know that young people from global majority communities are not actually less likely to take part in youth work compared to their white peers, but they're much less likely to stay participating in youth work. So they want to take part, they're getting involved, but they're not being able to sustain that support. And there are kind of many barriers to that. And some of the barriers that young people from global majorities point to most, and this is again in that barriers research funded by DCMS that we published just a couple of weeks ago, they point to the cost of activities and, importantly, the cost of transport to get to those activities. They talk about the lack of ethnic diversity of youth work staff and therefore finding it harder to relate to adults or to trust them. And also they report much higher rates of not being allowed to participate in youth work by their parents or carers. And those kind of community attitudes we really need to dig into more to understand how we can remove these barriers. In terms of the impact of youth work on young people, we are in a much better place to talk about this than we were a couple of years ago. A big systematic literature review that UK Youth was involved in, again funded by DCMS, shows from the strongest international evidence that young people who engage in youth work have short-term benefits, improved physical health, improved well-being, improved educational outcomes. And crucially, and again, this is a really important piece of longitudinal research that, that we've done with SQW and the University of Essex, has shown that if you engage in youth work as an adolescent, you are much more likely to be happier, healthier, and wealthier as an adult compared to people from exactly the same background as you who didn't have access to youth work. So not only are we able to now confidently say youth work has a positive impact in the short term, we're able to back up with really rigorous evidence the impact that youth work has into adulthood, that life-changing impact that youth workers talk about all the time. And our economic analysis from just a couple of years ago shows that for every £1 the government's spending on youth work, they're getting about £3.20 of benefits back from reduced crime, increased employment, and reduced pressure on mental health services. We also, if that's the positive impact of giving people youth work, we now, sadly, because of the big cuts to government funding, know what happens when you take youth work away. And what are the negative impacts that happen when you remove youth work, not just what are the positive impacts that happen when you give people youth work. And with 95% of local authorities reducing their spending on youth services by at least a quarter in the last 10 years, we've got lots of examples to choose from. So it's a really important piece of research from the Institute for Fiscal Studies last year, and again, a piece of research that we did with SQW last year, looking at what happens when you take youth centres away. And both of these studies conclude that crime rises and antisocial behaviour rises when you remove a youth club. And that Institute for Fiscal Studies research looks at education in particular and finds that the closure of youth centres in a local area is associated with a reduction in educational attainment by as much as a whole GCSE grade. That is an incredibly large impact on people's life chances through education. So we now can confidently say youth work has these positive effects, and it's really clear what happens when you take it away. At the time when public finances are really stretched, we'd be arguing you can't afford not to invest in youth work. And just in the last kind of minute or so, as we wrap up, I said, I've got to pack a lot in here, but we will share slides with the links to all of the detail here. It's really important that we keep doing research about how to make youth work be delivered even more effectively and keep responding to young people's changing lives. And this is a big focus of our work here at UK Youth. We have been testing lots of different approaches to support how to kind of apply the superpowers youth workers have to the issues that young people are experiencing around mental health, around employability, around community safety. Our Empower programme for young women and girls' wellbeing, Pro Bono Economics did an analysis that published just a few weeks ago that found £5 worth of wellbeing benefits for every £1 invested from that really effective programme. We're currently working with the Youth Endowment Fund on a randomized control trial to test whether a summer jobs program for young people most at risk of violence is effective, and we're into year 2 of that now. And we're also doing further employability work, and our Hatch program has shown really positive employability benefits by having that long-term youth worker support. And actually, almost 2/3 of participants who were not in education, employment, or training were still in paid employment 6 months after finishing that program, which is an incredibly positive set of outcomes for an employability program. And finally, breaking news, because it came out just yesterday, actually in the middle of the night. We have just had some research published by DCMS. It's been a long time coming to get this one out, but we're really proud of it. Looking at youth worker interactions with other sectors and how to improve multi-agency working. And when we, as Lena highlighted, so much work here going on with Young Futures Hubs, with other kind of collaborative working between youth work and formal education and educational enrichment, looking at how youth workers are already interacting with other sectors and how to make that even stronger is a really important piece of research. So do look out over the next couple of weeks for some more spotlights on that. And I'll stop there.
Now that is a news flash and a half, I gotta say. Better than Sky Sports, I gotta tell you. Jacob, thanks so much for working your way through that. We'll hold questions for the round of Q&A later. So we'll move swiftly on to our next speaker, who is Paul Lidell. Paul is a partnership and programs manager and also the lead for youth work at BBC Children in Need, working across sectors partnerships that support grassroots youth work and young people's well-being. He has a background in funding and program development. Paul manages the charity's corporate partnership with McDonald's. If you haven't heard, you're about to hear it, including support for the Making It program, a youth-led initiative that connects McDonald's restaurants with their local youth services. He's passionate about changing the negative narrative around young people and supporting them to be safe and welcome in civic spaces rather than just tolerated. Paul, over to you.
Yes, great. Thank you, Caleb. And 2 hard acts to follow there, I have to say. So just going to share my screen here. And can people see that now? Is that okay?
Just loading, I think. Yep, we're up and running. Thank you, Paul.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for the opportunity today, and I'm really excited to share the journey and impact of what is, I think, a unique partnership between BBC Children in Need and McDonald's that's particularly focused on detached youth work, but also that kind of element of community transformation. It's not just about funding or branding, it's about real change in real places. And the partnership was born from these 4 pillars that are at the top, which is our youth review. So Children in Need is the largest independent funder of youth work in the UK, and it makes up about 30% of our portfolio. But we recognised through our responsive programme where are the gaps, and that was around access to youth provision, trusting youth workers to do their job, celebrating youth work and empowering young people. And we basically took that to McDonald's and they said, yep, we'll help you achieve that. So the broad range of the partnership is in that bottom kind of element, and honestly each one of these boxes could take up a 15-minute presentation. So I really do want to call out the training element there. We've taken McDonald's funding and we're funding 1,000 youth work qualifications across the UK over 3 years through partnerships with NYA, Youth Scotland, Quivus in Wales, and Youth Work Alliance in Northern Ireland. My role would be much easier if there was one system right across the UK, but unfortunately that's not the case. But basically, if you get a grant from Children in Need, you're eligible to apply for your staff to get those youth work qualifications, which I think is fantastic. I'm really proud of that. That contextual safeguarding element as well. We've been working with Dr. Caroline Furman and Durham University, and in fact Dr. Furman was on stage at the McDonald's AGM in Portugal last week. They've got the commitment now to train all 180,000 crew members in the contextual safeguarding approach, which I feel is a real celebration there. But for this, we're going to focus on that detached youth work element, and that's about ultimately because that's meeting young people where they are, and quite often they're in McDonald's. It's not about community policing through youth workers, it's about building trust and creating those safe spaces. And with that £10 million over 5 years that McDonald's has committed to, we're seeing, hopefully making a massive difference through youth work. Now, I can't take credit for these slides. This is rocket science who really helped us understand the depth of the work. And through their surveys, interviews, site visits, they captured the lived experience of youth workers, franchisees, and of course, young people. Their evaluation really shows how these partnerships are not only forming, but thriving and delivering outcomes for all involved, and also highlighting some of the challenges which I'll cover in this as well. These are the outcomes that we set out to achieve. So I should have highlighted that the Making It programme is how McDonald's view this kind of programme of connecting with the local youth services and celebrating youth work. But these are the main outcomes for crew, youth workers and young people. And it's fair to say that we've already exceeded expectations. Staff have noted that they feel safer and more confident. Youth workers are reaching young people in new ways. They're also reaching young people who are not engaging with any other services. And those young people are gaining skills, support and a sense of belonging. And in a lot of cases, McDonald's feels like their space, and to engage positively with youth workers there is having massive impact. And in some cases, young people who've been banned from McDonald's have worked with youth workers, not only just to get back into the restaurant, but have now secured employment through the programme as well, which is just fantastic. And now the transformation in restaurants is truly tangible. Now, Children Need is not here to address an antisocial behaviour problem in McDonald's. We're here for positive outcomes for young people, but it can't be ignored that antisocial behaviour has dropped dramatically. Staff are more engaged and families are returning to restaurants because restaurants feel calmer, safer spaces. And I think there, one manager sharing that police calls had dropped by over 50%. That's this isn't just social impact, it's business impact. As I always say, I think we've made the moral argument around youth work. We now need to make the commercial argument around it there as well, and we're absolutely seeing that as well. So let's look at the numbers. In Knowsley, which I know is one of the youth transformation pilots, antisocial behaviour reports fell by 61%, which is astonishing. In Brixton, that staff turnover dropped by 52%. Staff feel safer at work, they feel happier at work. And across multiple sites, turnover in pounds increased, proving that youth work isn't just good for communities, it's good for business. For instance, and I think what's really worth noting here is that reduction in Derby, because we fund supporting communities there to deliver detached youth work across Derbyshire, and that's co-funded by the Police and Crime Commission. It costs £1,000 every time police are called out to a McDonald's restaurant to deal with whatever situation. So really, in terms of return on investment, I think youth work is a pretty good bet there. Now, McDonald's use something called Staff Safe, that if things kick off in the restaurant, staff can hit a button, and that's the Staff Safe data that we've got there. We saw antisocial behaviour incidents fall below the national average. As you can see that yellow line at the top, that's the UK average. So in every single instance, targeted youth engagement shifted behaviour patterns. It created safer public spaces. And again, returning to that Derbyshire for that, £1,000 every time the police gets called to McDonald's. We've got an approximation that the project in Brixton, which is the first pilot project, has probably saved around £500,000 in terms of cost of crime since it started about 18 months ago. I don't have that figure verified, but I've got complete trust in the person that worked it out. And in terms of the impacts for those youth organisations, they've been able to expand their reach, delivering in new ways. They've built stronger community ties. They've also gained visibility. That detached youth work has allowed them to connect with young people who wouldn't normally engage. So it's creating new pathways for support and mentorship. And what we'd seen before is that youth workers were already in McDonald's. Its crew members didn't know they were there. We've got examples of youth workers, detached youth workers, getting thrown out of McDonald's because they've been over speaking to young people and are seen as part of the problem. We're completely turning that round by and youth workers being mediators between young people and McDonald's staff. And we keep hearing more and more, give respect to get respect, and that works two ways. But for youth organisations, it's been there's been a lot of learning in terms of particularly around safeguarding and risk assessment of delivery in McDonald's restaurants. But most importantly, what are the impacts for young people? And these are youth work outcomes. There's no two ways about it. Young people feel more confident, they feel more connected, and they feel more supported. They're accessing safe spaces, just as we heard in the previous presentations. They're building relationships, and they're being diverted from risky behaviours. This is absolutely life-changing work, and it's happening in car parks, it's happening over McFlurries, and it's not just within youth centres. I think it's fantastic that such a large organisation like McDonald's, who literally has a presence on every single high street in Britain, is really welcoming young people rather than just tolerating young people. It's welcoming youth work in as well, and really changing that narrative, as Caleb highlighted. But these things are never smooth and they're never linear. The most successful partnerships build on existing strengths. Every single one is different. It needs to respond to local need and work towards those shared goals. McDonald's restaurants have become hubs for youth work. Not all of them, but it's something like over 200, and that is growing every day. Those hubs for youth work that link young people to services, support and opportunity. And I kind of feel that it's the second point here that's the most relevant. And because that's the model that we've seen has the most success. It's not just detached, and I know people can be purists about detached youth work. This is detached and outreach. It's about a whole ecosystem of organisations that young people can be signposted to surround every restaurant. They've always been there. Spiral Skulls in Brixton said their premises were always over the road just from the Brixton McDonald's, but it took a funder like Children Need to come in. It's our role to make that introduction, to say, actually, young people aren't negative. There is amazing things happening all around about these restaurants, and you just need to tap into that. We've seen that very successfully in Knowsley as well, actually, with the restaurant now being represented in those multi-agency meetings as well as a key stakeholder. Oh dear, my screen has frozen.
We have you at slide 6 at the moment.
Oh dear. There we are. There we are. But of course, there are challenges as well. The key one is lack of funding. We cannot fund every single connection across the UK. So where we have tried to identify funding gaps, who's funded to do what work, and this does to broaden out. And we've learned from that again in the Knowsley project, where Vibe are working across multiple different organisations and supporting each other, and created a really kind of positive kind of multi-agency approach there. Communication breakdowns, staff turnover can disrupt progress as well. You might have a really good business manager there who then moves on, and communication can just stop. But ultimately, these are solvable. And that's where we're working with McDonald's HQ about much clearer messaging, having a basic toolkit of how best to connect between the two, sustained investment, and ongoing training as well. It's also the case that most McDonald's restaurants have high numbers of staff. So a shift change can result in a complete change in attitudes towards a partnership. They're busy places. These are busy people, doing in a high pressure job. Sometimes supporting youth work can feel like just another thing to do, and we need to be aware of that and cognizant of that. Apologies, I'm trying to get forward again here. There we are. Now, we have developed some recommendations for McDonald's, funders like Children in Need and youth organisations, which are kind of practical, evidence-based insights that can help scale and sustain this work. Because if McDonald's can do it, others in the high street can do it as well. And it was great that Jacob highlighted one of those amazing partnerships they've got with KFC, for instance, as well. But for McDonald's and other high street businesses, the message is clear. And we think working with youth organisations reduces antisocial behaviour, it improves staff morale, and it boosts profits. Now, if that's not a win-win, I don't know what is. It also doesn't require huge investment, just commitment and openness. And I think this is where it's really key, is when we start to look at the National Youth Strategy. Where are the sources of income? Where are the biggest wins that we can deliver around there? So working with corporate partners, using funds from the high street to work positively with young people, I think is going to be a key element of how we support young people in the future. And just on that second point there, about leading to successful hires, one thing that came out is that neurodiverse young people can find the McDonald's environment really difficult, and that can lead to challenges around employment in particular. But McDonald's also now have delivery-only kitchens, which are much calmer, less bright spaces. So there are appropriate spaces for all, which can make employment much more accessible as well. And McDonald's is a really supportive employer in our experience. It's the largest employer of young people in the UK. So if we can support better access there, then we absolutely will. And to funders.
Probably just about a minute left there, Paul.
Yep, no worries. And for funders, this model shows that the partnerships with high street businesses are a low-cost, high-impact way to reach young people. Flexibility and long-term support are the key to unlocking sustained change. And Caleb, yes, you probably saw the numbers at the bottom there, but I did have a bit of a case study, but then realised that 15 minutes and 25 slides does not go into each other. So I think I'll just leave it there, and happy to share those slides at another point.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. I mean, such a really, really superb insight to how the corporate world and yourselves and the youth sector world are coming together to work deeply in communities. And some of the stats are astounding. You know, there's got to be a hook for the corporates to stay interested, and the wider predeterminates in terms of outcomes for children and young people. So brilliant stuff. I'm sure there'll be questions for you. And finally, we'll introduce our final guest speaker, who is Alux Stutz, who's the head of knowledge at the National Youth Agency. Alux leads the NYA's knowledge team, overseeing a group of 5 researchers and data analysts with over 15 years of experience in design and delivering complex research and evaluation projects, and a strong track record of generating actionable insights for policy and practice. Alux brings a deep expertise in youth policy, youth structure, infrastructure, and service quality. Alux has joined the NYA as a head of knowledge in November 2022. This is his second stint at NYA, originally spending 10 years in the head of policy role at the agency. Prior to rejoining the NYA, Alux was a research manager for a not-for-profit social research agency. His work spans government departments and independent bodies, including the Department for Education, DCMS, and the Nuffield Trust. And his current role is responsible for the National Youth Sector Census and the Annual Youth Worker Survey. These contribute towards the most comprehensive data sets on youth work practice, providing a robust evidence base to inform strategic investment and sector development. Alux, the mic's yours. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Caleb. I'll just share my screen. We already see.
Yeah, I think it's just converting into presenter mode. Display settings to switch them around. So just there you go.
Real.
Perfect. Good to go.
Real. Thanks, Caleb, and thank you for the opportunity today. Yeah, my name's Alux Stutz. I'm the head of knowledge at NYA. And for those of you that aren't aware of the NYA, we're the national body for youth work in England, and we our remit is to enable great youth work to happen by setting standards, growing capacity, and building the case to improve the quality and quantity of youth work, which is particularly what I want to talk about today. So It's interesting, and Jacob's given a fantastic overview of the evidence and what we know about youth work. But I do think understanding the sector today, despite what we know and the journey that we've come on, I still think it's much harder than it used to be. Back in the day, when youth work was delivered predominantly by local authorities, it would be much easier to track what's happening where and resourcing. And I think now it's much more challenging as a sector as fragmented. I think there's the data that is available at a national level tends to be based on annual spending returns, which are probably not as accurate as they can be. And I think while this kind of data is useful in identifying trends, I think what it lacks is providing detail on actually what youth work is happening, what are the types of services being offered, who's delivering them, how's it being delivered, in partnership with whom, and so forth. So what we've tried to do is kind of unpick this in a number of ways. So we've kind of taken three approaches. We've taken, as Jacob mentioned, the census. We have the National Youth Sector Census. We're into its 4th year now, and again, as a data set, it's really large. It offers data on youth work delivery, types of activities going on, where it's taking place, information on workforce, and also the financial state of the sector, which is really interesting. And the data that we get, for example, on financial information is quite considerably different to that provided to Section 251, which is interesting. We also have our workforce survey, and this is just about to be launched for the 3rd year now. It's going to be launched in a couple of weeks, so look out for this. Up to date, we've had, I think, about 2,500 responses to our workforce survey, which is great because this really focuses on the youth workers themselves. A better kind of exploring where youth workers are employed, the kind of roles that they're doing. We look at terms and conditions. We explore training requirements for local for youth workers and volunteers. And also we ask them about their future and where they see their future, which is really helpful in thinking about sector workforce requirements going forward. The third area is, and it's a relatively new area that we've been involved in, is our local data dashboards. And in an environment now where a lot of youth work investment is place-based, it's really important now more than ever to understand what is going on in a local level. So what we've done is we've brought together for each upper tier local authority a dashboard which offers draws from a range of different data sets. It draws from census data, it draws from workforce data. It also, importantly, it draws from insight from some of the programs that we deliver, as well as the kind of public data sets that are available on statistical data sets on various thematic areas. And it's really important because that then allows us to kind of plot at a local level where provision is, what's happening, and so forth. And it's central to our partnership work with the Home Office in particular to support the kind of the Young Futures Prevention Partnerships element of the Young Futures programme. So what does it look like? And this builds on some of the information that Jacob provided. You know, we now, the scale of youth work is impressive. It's in every place and space. We now have location data that on youth work taking place in about 28,000 locations across England now, which is great. We can we confirm that the kind of broader trends that we've seen over the last decade, where with a shift towards to VCSE providers and diversification of providers. I think that almost 80% of youth work provision is now taking place in outside local authorities. The sector is more fragmented, and while it's available to young people aged from as young as 8 to 24, we do find that the majority of provision is provided for 13 to 19-year-olds. But it's an uneven picture. While there may be provision across the country, is uneven, and this probably it goes some way to explain Jacob's point about the people accessing youth work and levels of affluence, because twice as many organisations or youth work organisations operate in the most deprived areas across the country compared with the least deprived. So, an open access youth provision, while that remains the most commonly delivered type of weekly provision, we also find most youth work organisations are providing targeted support on a weekly basis. And again, we find that those in the most deprived areas, they tend to be delivering the widest range of targeted services and activities to a much wider range of young people than those in the most affluent areas. Thinking about demand, demand for youth work support continues to grow in the face of the wider social pressures. Youth workers tell us there's increasing demand on them to meet the growing needs of young people. And we put some statistics up here, but issues around mental health and well-being, online harm, safeguarding, and crime and antisocial behaviour have all increased significantly in the last year. As an example, 2/3 of people that responded to the census reported an increased demand for targeted services that respond to violence and crime, for example. And meeting this need is really challenging for the sector. Youth workers are having to quickly adapt their methods to changes in young people's experiences. Some of these changes, like things like maybe the cost of living, for example, might be temporary, but other areas where evolving use of technology and digital technologies are more long-term and require some thought and resource. And this against a backdrop where we're seeing waiting lists becoming more common. Sorry, bear with me. Waiting lists becoming more common, and nearly half now have waiting lists compared to 39% a year ago. So waiting lists are growing and demand is increasing, which is a difficult picture. So talking now about sector resilience, and again, we all know that the frightening amount of money that's come out of the sector in the last 10 years, and there's unsurprisingly significant challenges to investment, and this is particularly for open access youth work. Organisations report a decline in operating budgets for many, and operating costs increasing. So it's not surprising then when we find that average expenditure shows a downward trend across providers. And that's led to nearly half of VCSE organisations reporting having insufficient reserves to operate beyond 6 months if their funding was stopped. And this is particularly problematic again in the most deprived areas, where organisations are more likely to have shorter reserves. And we're also seeing now organisations, VCSE organisations, relying on multiple funding streams. Typically now we find that an organisation relies on at least 4 to 5 different funding streams. That can be great, but it can also present its own issues, and there is danger that it can distract from an organisation's mission, but it also is problematic, potentially problematic, because on average these contracts are about 9 months in length, and that doesn't offer the long-term flexibility to plan for the future for organisations. I just wanted to touch on safeguarding. We've done, MYA has done quite a bit of work with YEF, looking at the role of youth work and youth work organisations in safeguarding of young people at risk of violence and exploitation. And we found that about half of organisations are involved in that in some way in safeguarding young people, although there are factors that influence that. So, you know, youth workers operating in local authority roles are much more likely to be directly involved in safeguarding than those from the VCSE. And again, organised deprivation has a huge impact, with organisations in the most deprived areas are about twice as likely to be directly involved in safeguarding. We've looked at the types of safeguarding support for types of risk that these young people face, and while most deliver targeted support for antisocial behaviour, we also find about 60% of providers are also providing targeted support for those young people at risk of knife crime, or indeed violence against women and girls. I just want to touch, I touched earlier in the question on the workforce and skills, but I think, simply put, there aren't enough trained youth workers to meet the needs of young people today. And there's a challenging recruitment landscape. So even if the government gave us back the 1 billion plus for the sector that they took away, that there isn't sufficient staff to deliver that investment. We're finding on average an organisation has about 4 full-time equivalent staff supported by 2 volunteers, although the ratio can change dependent on organisation, but only half of these have a youth work qualification, and that goes back to that kind of training requirement. And why is that? Then terms and conditions aren't great. We all know that. You don't become a youth worker for the salary. But some research that we carried out last year looking into vacancies for youth workers found that a quarter of advertised roles pay below the national living wage, and a quarter of those roles are temporary or 0-hour contracts, which doesn't offer that kind of sustainability. And that's challenging. And the reason that's important is because we know that from our research, we know that when people enter the sector, they tend to want to remain in the sector. You know, overwhelmingly, they tell us they're hopeful that they will remain in the sector next year, in the same role within the same organisation, which is great, which is positive. And that's important because the longer they remain in the sector, we find them more likely they are to pursue a formal qualification, which is really key to us, which makes it vital that we're creating sustainable jobs for the future for youth work. So what does this mean for you and the wider youth sector? It means that at a national level, as Jacob also set out, we do have a clearer understanding of where needs are greatest now, and that allows us to help. We've got things like the national youth strategy coming out, and it really helps us make the case to maximise investment activity, which is good. But at the more local level, we have a much clearer understanding of delivery on the ground, what models of delivery look like, you know, and a better understanding of the local youth offer. And that's really important. Lena mentioned programs like the Local Youth Transformation Pilot, which we are delivering as part of the consortium. But, you know, there are increasingly more and more of these place-based program activities. So it's really vital to understand actually what the provision is at a local level. And thirdly, coming back to my point about workforce, it gets us, the evidence that we provide allows us to get a sense of the scale of the workforce challenge. So we're at MYA, we're beginning to define some workforce sufficiency benchmarks to understand a minimum and a good standard of workforce requirements. And as part of that, we're developing a reformed qualifications pathway, which recognises prior learning and qualifications, and we're trying to take a more modular approach to gaining qualifications to increase the pathway into the profession. I'm going to probably stop here because I've probably just about used up my time, but I just wanted to let people know that all our reports, the census, the workforce survey, our workforce proposals in pathways to practice documents are all available from our website. And things like census we have an interactive dashboard which is available on YouthWork One, which you can play around with your heart's content. I'll stop now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex, for the summary of your evidence to date, the YouthWork census, and how this impacts or gives you a picture about the workforce, the status of the youth sector workforce, and what that means in England. So really welcome open questions now from colleagues. We've got about 10 minutes to share, and very happy to hear from different speakers. So Sonia, kick us off.
I've got two quick questions. Paul, obviously we've got to mention that McDonald's have been named and shamed for their lack of protecting young people that work with them. So obviously they're being challenged about that because they're not always a best employer. And then Alex, the other question is about the apprenticeships. We've had a young person in Nottingham, where Nottingham Trent University is allowing them to do an MA. And I just wonder how someone can jump to do an MA when they haven't got a BA. And to me, that erodes the respect that youth work rightly deserves. There's a lot of voluntary sector people that are out there that, for whatever reason, couldn't afford to go to university and perhaps aren't being championed and haven't got the opportunity to get that qualification. So I'm really interested in apprenticeships for those people that, for whatever reason, didn't have the support to get that qualification, and they should be able to get that. But I want to know what those safety mechanisms are to stop people with limited experience get a qualification that other people have made sacrifices for or were unable to make sacrifices for, and just be able to jump to an MA.
Yeah, Paul, welcome your insights. And Alex, I might bring you in for your apprenticeship shop. Well, Paul.
Yeah, just on that point, and it's well made, Sonia. And actually, when that report first came out a couple of years ago, we walked away from the partnership. We couldn't remain in a partnership without an organisation that didn't value the young people that they employed. McDonald's response to that was to bring in PwC. They've done a major audit of every single restaurant that they've done. They've made major changes in terms of how staff speak up, and it's a part of the reason why they've embraced contextual safeguarding to such a degree, because they recognise that young people need to feel safe on both sides of the counter. That if a crew member sees another crew member being treated badly, that they feel supported and safe enough to stand up to that. So that gave us the confidence to re-enter into the partnership from that. But you're absolutely right to address, and it's one that we remain kind of continue to monitor as well. Our chief exec meets with their chief exec I think quarterly to discuss progress, so we've got a good relationship there. But no, you're absolutely right to flag it there, Sonia. But and it's certainly a good point about the qualifications as well, which I'll pass over to Alex, who has much more experience on that than I.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, and it's a great question, and I don't know the specific case that you're talking about, but what I can talk to you is about the reason why we are coming up with we are reforming the way in which we want to create the youth workers of tomorrow, and that's exactly that. We know that level, for example, the traditionally degree qualified youth workers, the numbers entering the programs are declining now quite considerably. We know courses are closing left, right, and centre, and that's part of the reason. Is that this is part of the reason why we are creating further qualifications at level 4 and level 5, so that we want to encourage those hard-working youth workers that have been in the sector for a long while that may have a level 3 qualification to take next steps into gaining further qualifications, whilst making the gap to level 6 a bit more accessible. And I'd urge you to. I'm not an expert in our workforce proposals. But I know that we are running 2 sessions in Youth Work Week, which will go into our approach for this in more detail, and I think that's now on Eventbrite. So I would urge you to sign up to that to participate in those conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks, Sonia, for your question. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Do we have any more questions from our viewers? I mean, if the youth work census misses so many community provision, youth provisions, they find it extremely to complete. Is any work going in to support them? So how do you, there's a question which is more pragmatic around mechanism. How do you get to those organizations that tend to probably be less represented, which are quite, I guess, small and deeply, maybe sometimes hidden? I'm sure you've done some stuff over iterations of your youth census to spread your testicles a bit. Do you want to just talk us through what's happened with that, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not a complete picture, but it is the largest data set of provision. What we are doing now is actually in this next iteration of census, we are actually changing the method of completion to make it more simple and straightforward for organisations, because one of the reasons, I won't go into the technical reasons, but one of the previous reasons that stop people completing the census is some of the kind of security steps that we need to go through to authenticate organisations. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to do more, and we're consistently trying to reach out to grassroots organisations. We go through local voluntary. I can't remember what they're called now, but voluntary. Like in Leicester, I know it's VAL, Voluntary Action Leicester. So there are community associations that we go through to promote. We do a huge amount of promotion in this. We have, since we've started supporting the Home Office's work with the Safer Streets initiative, that has gained us. That has opened up another section of the community that wouldn't necessarily have engaged with us. But it is a challenge, and we need your help. The census, any of these things are only ever as good as what goes into it. But having, back in the day, we had our audit. We had the annual local authority audit that we used to complete, and that was brilliant when local authorities were the biggest deliverers of youth work. But now it's much more challenging. So, really open to working with sectors to engage.
Great. I'm going to park about 2.5 minutes to come back and say, if we looked at 2026 with all that's under your bonnet around evidence, what does youth work sector look like for you, or what are your hopes? So we'll go to Anita first. Anita, please do come with me. Just say who you are, what your role is. There we go. You can unmute yourself now and then go for it.
Oh, great. Hi. I'm Anita Beckett. I'm not currently working as a youth worker. I'm currently working as a learning and development consultant, but I've had about 20 years. Sort of comes back really to the qualification status, etc., and having to move into another sector. But anyway, my question really always comes back to the money in respect of, someone mentioned we have multiple funders. So an organisation might have 4 different funding pots. And I wonder how we navigate and manage that from a quality assurance or evidence base in respect of competing outcomes, because this is always the challenge. Is what I found, and I'm going to be really frank, when I worked in a local community once with quite challenging young people, is I was like, right, we've got to do this funding bid, so we're going to have to label you in some way, or we're going to have to navigate this, because we had to fit them to fit the funding. And for me, the intersectionality of young people does not fit into boxes, but the funding systems we have across the country make us put our young people in boxes. And we talk about open community work and community development, which I'm passionate about. Open youth work, be it detached or a building based, is about not having a label when you walk through the door. You're a young person who might have multiple needs at that point in time, but your funders might be directing you to specifically look at a specific need. So we really do need to move away from that, whether it's in the voluntary sector, statutory sector. We've created an environment where we have our young people compartmentalized, and some of them can be a young person who is a young carer who may have committed a criminal offence and may also be on the autistic spectrum. And that is, it's that bit that I've always struggled with as a youth worker, the basis is relationship. And again, if we want a society where our young people feel valued for who they are, not for the problems they bring. So I just really wanted to put that out there. So it's not really a question. If you have an answer to it, that'd be great. But I don't know if we can answer that in like 3 minutes. But
we probably can't. But each one, Jacob, Paul, Alex, Lena, I've probably had some of these conversations in different ways along the time, and it's a very difficult summary of activations. There is a will to centralize outcomes for young people, but there's also an acknowledgement that outcomes almost shouldn't drive why we work with young people, and that's the tension. And what we've got today is, I believe, the youth sector doing its damnedest best to work out in what ways can we narrate the story and the value of what we do, and therefore what level of investment, infrastructure, support do we need to do that. And it's playing catch up on many fronts. But you're right, like there is, I'm in other, just so you know, Anita, just to help you out, I'm in other chambers where this is the very center of how do we hold all of this in the same space. And I don't think there's an easy way. I think everyone's trying to have a go and the best that they can. Yeah.
I think the key for me, it's the communities we want and the participation of our young people in those communities. And if we can gather that, but and I get that youth violence is on the rise, but all I hear is youth violence, and there are so many more young people, and also those young people being gathered in with everyone else and not put to the side in this sort of box over here, because that isn't going to achieve the long-term aim of community cohesion, I don't think. So anyway, I'll stop now.
I support your point strongly. Just to kind of round us off, youth violence and youth work shouldn't be synonymously spoken about, and we're cautious of that. So just to play back. But thanks for your thoughts, Anita. Very happy to have a conversation offline. Colleagues, you've got like 20 seconds each to say what does next year look like. Jacob, I'll start with you.
Well, this year's been defined by trying to shape a meaningful youth strategy. The next year is going to be defined by really making sure that the warm words follow through to real tangible promises and change for young people, making sure that the young people who've given their time and energy to contribute to what they think the national youth strategy should look like, have got their opinions respected.
Great, thank you. Paul, in your work.
Yeah, for me, it's about really highlighting and valuing that grassroots, community-based universal youth work, be that in centres, be that in high streets, and ultimately recognising that young people are not the problem the way that they're made out to be within the press, but actually if we value their presence in civic spaces and in the community, recognise the fact that they need somewhere to go, then actually we'll have a much better society in general, and that's certainly what I'm working towards.
Brilliant, thank you. And please fill out our feedback form. Yanina just posted it. Lena, let me come to you first.
I mean, I guess our work is slightly cut out for us for the next year. It's just publishing and starting the delivery of the National Youth Strategy, learning from our new programmes. And for me personally, with the role that I hold, is making sure that all of the work that we've done across government with 10 departments continues after the publication and for long after that.
Thank you. And Alex, thank you.
To me, I'm going to bang on about workforce again. To me, it's coming up with a plan to ensure that we have that young people have access to qualified youth workers, and that's sustainable going forward.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much for attending this virtual learning cafe. No one had a coffee and cake or tea and cake. Hopefully next time. The next one will be in around the January period, where we'll be launching the practice guide, which is how do you turn evidence into action? And that's why it exists, and some of these colleagues will hopefully help us, and we can help them in doing that. You guys have been great. We've had great discussions. You can reach us through our usual emails, check out our socials, join the newsletter. And thank you to Alex, thank you to Jacob, thank you to Lena, and thank you to Paul. Almost in alphabetical order. We'll take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.